Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 29 July 2024, Monday, and today we have some important articles from different newspapers, and we'll try to discuss all those important news articles one by one. And before discussing them, let's try to solve one practice question for prelims that we have given to you yesterday. The question was Janjatiya Gaurav Divas is celebrated to mark the birth anniversary of which of the following leaders? So that was the question that I have given to you yesterday, and I've also told you that this is a very important question because the very same tribal leader with which this Ulgulan, a tribal movement, is being associated with, right? So Ulgulan is also known as Munda rebellion. So it is also known as Munda rebellion. So therefore, the correct answer for this question is Birsa Munda. So on the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda, Janjatiya Gaurav Divas is celebrated every year. Now, if you look at the explanation part of this particular question, this Janjatiya Gaurav Divas will be celebrated every year. So in order to recognize the efforts of the tribals, okay, so tribals actually play a very important role because they have their own indigenous culture, and we need to recognize the role that the tribals actually play in the preservation of the indigenous or local cultural heritage and even promotion of Indian values such as national pride, valor and hospitality. So all these values, in protection and promotion of all these values, tribals in fact play a very important role. A tribal freedom fighter museum at Ranchi would be inaugurated by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in fact on 15th November every year. So it also the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda, and in fact he is revered as god by the tribal communities across India. So therefore, on the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda, that is 15th November every year, is being marked as the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. And in fact, Birsa Munda is a leader of Munda rebellion, and that particular rebellion is also known as Ulgulan, because about Ulgulan there was also a prelims question, right? UPSC already asked about this Ulgulan, so therefore it is also very important. And today we have some a river based and a map based practice question. See, if you look at the previous year question papers of UPSC prelims, very often they are asking about some important rivers. For example, they are asking about Indus river system. So very often asking about the Indus river system, Ganga river system, and even Godavari, which is most prominently and repeatedly asked by UPSC several times. So therefore the question is with respect to the Godavari river system. Godavari is the largest river in the peninsular India. That is the first statement. And second statement says the Godavari river rises from Triambakeshwar and drains into Arabian Sea. And third statement, Purna, Indravati, Musi, Manjira are the tributaries of Godavari river. Now one thing that I would like to tell you with respect to this question, you need to identify all major river systems in India and the tributaries of those river systems, whether they are draining into the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal. And it is also important that you need to identify the states through which these rivers have been flowing through. For example, you need to identify the Brahmaputra river system, Ganga river system and Yamuna, and even the Indus river system also, and some of the important South Indian rivers, particularly Godavari, Krishna, and even the Kaveri and Mahanadi. So these are some of the important river systems that you should have some detailed map, and you should also have a good amount of content on these rivers, because even if any question is being asked on these rivers, you could answer with more confidence. The first question, every day we're also been discussing about some descriptive based questions, right? So daily practice of such questions will help you frame an appropriate answer in your mains examination, and it will also help you identify the actual demand of the question. So what would be the actual demand of the question? So based on the demand of the question, so we are actually giving some questions, right? So the question also consists of an approach, right? Approach essentially means that a proper structure of that particular question. The question is, discuss the significance of natural farming. Yesterday we have discussed about the natural farming. Now today the question is, discuss the significance of natural farming and suggest some measures, and those measures can be taken for a smooth transition from conventional to chemical free farming. Now when we talk about the conventional farming, now in the conventional farming, farmers use chemicals and fertilizers, chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and it is also resource intensive and higher input cost as well. But on the other hand, natural farming uses a limited or a minimum amount of inputs or resources, right? So yesterday we have discussed one editorial on the natural farming. Now we'll look into the approach of this question. So how can we introduce this? So you can write a basic definition of natural farming. What constitutes a natural farming? You can just write the definition of natural farming. Introduce writing what is natural farming. And then the first part of the answer, in the body part of the answer, you just discuss the significance of natural farming. Now why natural farming is very, very important, you have to discuss that. You could present data, you could give examples, but you need to prove that why natural farming in the present context, in the present Indian context, is very significant. So once you're done with this first part, then you have to suggest some measures that can be taken for a smooth transition from conventional to chemical free farming, right? So what are the measures that can be taken to make a smooth transition from the conventional farming to chemical free farming? Right? So ultimately you could give a brief conclusion, right? So essentially emphasizing on the need for shifting agriculture to natural farming or organic farming without compromising the incomes of the farmers, without compromising the food security of India's population. So that is how you need to conclude this answer. Now in the introduction, so you just have to define what is natural farming. So in general, natural farming is considered as a practice, and even some consider it as art also, right? Some consider it as art, or some consider it as a practice, and increasingly the science of working with the nature. So it involves the science working with the nature to achieve much more with less inputs, right? So that's why we have said that natural farming is less resource intensive. In fact, this practice, however, has been associated with decline in yield. Natural farming is very often results in decline in the agriculture yield, right? So in fact, there is also another criticism of natural farming, that there is not much improvement in the farmer's income, and in the long run natural farming would also threaten the food security of a country. So these are some criticism, but we will briefly understand natural farming and its significance. Okay, so this natural farming as an approach, this was first introduced by Masanobu Fukuoka, right? So a Japanese farmer. So he was the one who first introduced the natural farming. In fact, he introduced this in a book, The One Straw Revolution, right? So the One Straw Revolution, that was a book. On this particular book, he introduced, or he wrote about the natural farming. And in fact, when we talk about the natural farming, it is also more or less similar to integrated farming, because the natural farming system is much more diversified, right? So it is a diversified farming system, and in fact it also integrates crops, trees and livestock. So therefore, over a period of time, what happens is it allows the optimum use of the existing biodiversity that would benefit the farmer, that would benefit the environment, and that would also benefit the consumers also, right? So this would be a win-win situation without degrading the environment or without harming the environment. However, now when we talk about the natural farming internationally, this natural farming is very, very famous as a regenerative agriculture, right? In the international level, the natural farming is known as regenerative agriculture, and in fact it is considered as one of the most prominent strategy to save the planet. Okay, so regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture actually has a lot of potential to save the planet from the negative consequences of environmental degradation. And in fact, natural farming also holds promise of further enhancing farmers' income. Because see, so when we talk about the agriculture produce, particularly the produce from natural farming techniques, so there is a huge demand at the global level, right? So even if we export agriculture products to other countries such as European Union and the US and even other developed countries, very often these agricultural products are rejected by those countries' markets. So because we use more fertilizer, right? So we also use more pesticides, and that doesn't meet their sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, and that's the problem. But because of a huge demand, and in natural farming farmers will not use chemical fertilizer and pesticides, so what happens, so the international demand can be met through the natural farming, and that would substantially increases the farmers' incomes also. And in fact, the natural farming, apart from substantially increasing the farmers' incomes, it would also comes with other benefits, right? So what are those other benefits? For example, it would restore the soil fertility, and it would also further enhance the environmental health. Now what has been happening due to the anthropogenic activities, now there is a kind of an exploitation of natural resources, and that further leads to the degradation of the environment. So therefore, natural farming actually holds a potential to further preserve and protect the environmental health, and even it has the potential to reduce or mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions also, right? So it would also reduce or mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions. And apart from that, we should not undermine the potential of natural farming with respect to managing the land practices, best land management practices or best land use practices. And even natural farming also holds a lot of potential with respect to sequester carbon from the atmosphere in soils, plants, and in fact it is also useful in the long term. And it is also important that you should mention some initiatives that the government has undertaken with respect to the natural farming. In order to promote natural farming, the government has come up with certain initiatives. Now what are those initiatives? For example, Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, right? So this would promote organic farming and natural farming across the country. It would encourage farmers to take up the organic farming. It would provide certain incentives to the farmers by the government. It would provide certain subsidies on certain inputs, right? So apart from that, a submission on agroforestry, so would be the another scheme that was launched by the union government for promotion of natural farming. And even a national mission on sustainable agriculture, right? So national mission on sustainable agriculture is another program. And even the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana is also another major important program. So all these are the programs which are part of the natural farming. Now remember, so whenever you are writing any answer on natural farming, it is very important that you should mention these schemes so that you could further enrich your answer, right? So that will actually help you score more marks. And in fact, there are certain measures or suggestions that we need to be taken, and that can actually scale up the present natural farming, right? So what are the measures that can be adopted, that can be taken to scale up natural farming? Now when we talk about certain measures, as of now, agriculture is mostly concentrated in the Ganga basin alone, because we all knew that when we talk about the Ganga basin, a fertile alluvial soil support a wide variety of crops, especially wheat is cultivated, rice is cultivated in the alluvial soil in the Ganga belt. So therefore, when we talk about the natural farming, we need to think beyond the Ganga basin, right? So because there are number of regions with a huge potential for the natural farming, and therefore we need to focus on all those areas, and we need to gradually scale up the number of farmers who have been adopting this particular natural farming. And apart from that, the rain-fed regions use only a third of the fertilizers per hectare, and compared to the areas where irrigation is prevalent, right? So this is also a very, very important point, because there are number of rain fed areas, right? So those areas do not have access to irrigation. So agriculture is only dependent on the monsoon rainfall, whether it is southwest monsoon or northeast monsoon. So agriculture in those areas only dependent on the rainfall. So therefore these rain fed regions use only a third of the fertilizers per hectare compared to the areas where irrigation is prevalent. So that essentially means that in areas where there is a prevalence of irrigation infrastructure, those areas would use higher fertilizers. So therefore the shift to chemical free farming will be easier in these rain fed areas. So we should focus on these rain fed areas. There are a number of areas which essentially dependent on the rainfall itself. For example, in Madhya Pradesh, parts of Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and even Karnataka. And even the farmers also stand to gain, as the crop yields in these areas are also lower. Okay, so in these rain-fed areas, crop yield is also lower. However, so we need to enable the automatic enrollment of farmers to make a faster transition towards the chemical-free farming. Right? So, it is also very important that the government should extend the crop insurance schemes to cover all farmers who have been practicing the natural farming. Now, one such flagship program that the government has launched to cover agriculture with the insurance facility was Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, right? So Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana is a program. So through this particular program, the farming is covered with the insurance, right? So at a very lower premiums, farmers will pay a lower premiums, and in case anything happens to the field, right? For example, a pest attack, a flood or drought, so crops will be covered with the insurance. And in fact, any transition in the agriculture sector, transition especially from the chemical intensive or input intensive agriculture to less input intensive or less resource intensive agriculture, so that essentially should focus on crop diversification. Crop diversification is also very, very important, because monocropping is essentially associated with number of problems, right? So because when there is an area where there is a monocropping, and that particular crops would actually susceptible to the pest attack. Okay, so they are more vulnerable to the pest attack, monocropping. And monocropping, what happens over a period of time, the crop yield would also decreases, because the monocropping would have impact on the soil. It would also reduces the soil fertility as well. So therefore we need to cultivate, or we need to shift crops in every season, so that would further enhance that would help in retaining the soil fertility, right? So change in farming practices, it would further adds to the farmers' risk. And in this context, covering such risks could actually enhance the appetite of the farmers to embark on a transition. So essentially we need to focus on farmers making a transition from a chemical fertilizer or input intensive farming to less or no chemical fertilizer pesticide farming, that is natural farming. And providing support to agri MSMEs is also very, very important component of further encouraging the natural farming, because the micro enterprises, so these micro enterprises actually produce inputs for the chemical free agriculture, shall be provided support from the government. So government should actually extend support for these micro enterprises. However, in order to address the challenges of unavailability of readily available natural inputs, so natural inputs are very, very important in the natural farming, right? So in case of unavailability of these natural inputs, the promotion of natural farming needs to be combined with setting up of village level input preparation and even sales shops also. Okay, so 2 shops per village would be ideal across the country, and that could actually provide livelihood opportunities to even at least 5 million youth and even women in these rural areas. Now essentially, the natural farming and organic farming should be increasingly emphasized, especially at a time when the environmental degradation has been taking place at a faster pace, and the resources are being exploited, are being polluted, and soil fertility has been declining at a faster rate. So this could impact the overall productivity and the livelihoods of the farmers. So therefore, there is a need for the scientific advancements in the natural farming. So scientific advancements in the new varieties of crops. So where even if we practice natural farming or organic farming, so those varieties should not compromise on the overall productivity, and that would ensure the twin benefits of doubling farmers' income or increasing farmers' income, and even meeting the food security needs of country's population, right? So that's how you can write this conclusion. And even there are some more measures also you could also write, so these measures as well, right? For example, peer farmers as an inspiration. So there are a number of other farmers also who are also actually practicing the natural farming or organic farming. So therefore, a peer farmers can actually provide a lot of inspiration from other farmers who are interested to take up the natural farming. Okay, so in fact, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, this particular council's research estimates that at least 5 million farmers are already practicing some or other form of sustainable agriculture, and hundreds of NGOs are also involved in supporting farmers who have already engaged in the natural farming also. So therefore, in this context, learning from the peers, so the farmers who have been already practicing or already doing this natural farming, especially we need to talk about the champion farmers, through on-field demonstration has proved highly effective in further scaling up the chemical free agriculture, right? So Andhra Pradesh is the best example of this chemical free agriculture, right? So it would give a lot of fillip to the chemical free agriculture. So in this context, so community institutions can actually play a larger role. So we should not neglect the role of community institutions, right? Because in rural areas, it is very important. We need to further enhance the awareness among the farmers about the natural farming. So that area should be adequately focused upon. Okay, so in this context, farmers need to get a lot of awareness, and farmers should also be adequately supported, and that's very, very important. So in this context, the government should actually facilitate an ecosystem, and in that particular ecosystem, farmers can actually learn from and even support each other while making a rapid transition, and that's have to be looked into, and that is also a very, very important aspect. So beyond evolving a curriculum in agricultural universities, so there is also a need to upskill the agricultural extension and even sustainable agricultural practices. So these things have to be essentially focused upon, and that is very, very important here. And okay, so we have discussed about the natural farming, and we have also addressed the demand of the question. So we'll discuss one by one all important and all relevant articles for the today. And the first article that we are going to start this discussion is with reservations and the OBC creamy layer issue in recent times, because UPSC is in limelight in recent times. Why? Because some allegations over the trainee IAS officer that she was selected to IAS on malicious grounds, submitting the OBC certificate despite she's non-creamy layer candidate within the OBC. She had submitted the OBC certificate to the UPSC, and she also submitted the fake disability certificate. So these are allegations against the one of the trainee IAS officer from Maharashtra. So that is the context, and that's why UPSC is in limelight, and that is why reservations and OBC creamy layer that we are going to discuss. So the allotment of the Indian Administrative Service to a Maharashtra based IAS officer, trainee IAS officer, her name Pooja Kedkar. Okay, so she was given the other backward classes non-creamy layer certificate. Okay, so when I say non-creamy layer certificate, within the OBCs, reservations in the education and employment opportunities were provided to the OBCs based on the Mandal Commission recommendations. So Mandal Commission recommended 27% of the reservation for the other backward classes in education and employment opportunities. However, within the OBCs, there are certain wealthy, socially, educationally, economically progressive sections also within the OBCs. So in order to exclude that creamy population within the OBCs, so a creamy layer was introduced. Now creamy layer essentially means that within OBCs, those who are having a family income of more than 8 lakh rupees will not be given the reservation in the education and employment, and that is the creamy layer, right? So there are allegations about the OBC certificate being given to the creamy layer candidate, and even the multiple disabilities and a fake certificate has also. So all these things have raised issues surrounding the creamy layer within the OBC reservation, and we'll talk about that in a very brief manner. Okay, a very detailed manner. So, right, what is the history of reservations in India, right? So, we need to talk about the history of reservations in India. Now, in India, a reservation is an affirmative action, right? So, because OBCs, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes are recognized as the backward sections of the society, and in fact, so they have been facing the historical injustice throughout several years because of the existing caste system and caste based discrimination and caste system preventing the upward mobility of people. So what has been happening is the backward sections have been facing this historical injustice from several centuries. So in order to correct these historical injustices, so especially after the independence, Indian Constitution has included Article 15 and Article 16. So these two articles guarantee equality to all citizens in any policy of the government and even the public employment also, right? So equality would be given for all individuals, so everyone would be treated equally with respect to the policy of the government and even public employment also. However, in order to achieve equity, right, so equality is different from equity. Now, in order to achieve equity and in order to achieve a social justice among all the sections, so they also enable a special provisions for the advancement of socially and educationally backward classes. Within OBCs, there are certain socially and educationally backward classes, and all scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are recognized as socially and educationally backward classes. So therefore, Indian Constitution has allowed that the government can actually provide a special provisions for the advancement of these socially and educationally backward classes, and that's where the concept of reservation has actually started in India. Right, so if you talk about the reservation, right, so scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, scheduled castes are given 15% of the reservation in the total number of posts in case of a public employment or even educational institutions. A 15% of the reservation is being provided for the scheduled castes, and when we talk about the scheduled tribes, 7.5% of the reservation was given to the scheduled tribes. So right, so in both jobs and educational institutions and even the public sector undertakings at the central level. However, so when we specifically talk about the 27% of the reservation that was granted to the OBCs, in 1990, 27% of reservation for the other backward classes was implemented by the central government. Okay, so this was implemented by the central government based on the recommendations of Mandal Commission that was appointed in the 1980, and based on the recommendations of Mandal Commission, 27% of the reservation in public employment and educational institutions was awarded to the other backward classes. Other backward classes, only the non-creamy layer people. Okay, so in fact in 2019, again, to further expand the ambit of providing reservations to or to cover more individuals who are economically backward. Now earlier, Indian Constitution has not recognized the economic backwardness. But in 2019, what the Union Parliament has done in order to further expand the ambit of people who are covered under the reservation, a 10% of the reservation was given to the economically weaker sections within the unreserved category, because in certain upper castes also there are people who are economically weaker sections or who are economically backward. So therefore these economically weaker sections, 10% of the reservation was also awarded. So in this context, we need to briefly talk about the creamy layer, because the dispute is with respect to trainee IAS officer is with respect to the creamy layer. Now you can also go through the differences between the creamy layer and non-creamy layer. Now when we talk about creamy layer candidates within the OBCs, so that should be the income, family income should be above 8 lakh and they will be considered as creamy layer candidates. So in case within the OBCs, the any family income is less than 8 lakh, they will be considered as non-creamy layer candidate, and reservation benefits would be extended to the non-creamy layer candidates. And the other thing that you need to remember, that the creamy layer is only extended for the OBCs. So it is only extended to the OBCs but not scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So scheduled caste and scheduled tribes were not divided even if they have income more than 8 lakh per annum, but this creamy layer is only extended to the other backward classes only. So therefore the creamy layer, when we talk about the criteria for identifying a person, whether the particular person is part of the creamy layer, is actually based on the recommendations of Justice Ram Nandan Prasad Committee of 1993. Justice Ram Nandan Prasad Committee 1993 made a recommendations to identify the criteria of this creamy layer. And in fact, the creamy layer is actually determined by position, income of an applicant's parents alone, right? So for example, A is an applicant. So this creamy layer is actually considered based on the A's both parents and their total income. So the criteria belong to a creamy layer is based on parental income, and it is more than 8 lakh per year. So then those candidates will be considered as a creamy layer candidates within the OBCs, right? So within last 3 consecutive financial years, the family income should be more than 8 lakh rupees. Now what are the issues with respect to the reservations? Now there are certain allegations that this non-creamy layer within the OBCs is being misused, and economically weaker section certificates are also being misused by the candidates. Applicants manage to obtain this non-creamy layer and even EWS certificates through these dubious means, and even there was no verification also whether they are valid or not. So verification has to be done at the grassroots level, and that is very, very important. So this verification has to be done. So, and also with respect to disability certificates, so in order to take the benefit of 4% of the seats reserved for the persons with disabilities in the central government jobs, right? So that is also a very, very important aspect. And apart from that, there are also allegations of applicants and their parents adopting strategies to get around this creamy layer. Okay, so exclusion like gifting assets and even taking a premature retirement. So these things have to be plugged, and these these aspects of misuse of non-creamy layer and even economically weaker sections has to be curbed and should be prevented at with immediate effect. So that's how we can make that these things are not misused and genuine candidates should benefit, right? So it is very important that the genuine candidates would actually benefit from the reservation, because they are more deserved than the wealthy candidates. Now wealthy candidates, what they are doing, so in order to get the benefits of the reservation, they're simply producing the fake non-creamy layer and EWS certificates, and that has led to the exclusion of more deserved candidates for whom the reservation was intended. So therefore this is a very serious issue, and the governments should start taking this issue very, very seriously. And with respect to this, the Rohini Commission was constituted. Okay, so Rohini Commission was earlier set up, and the overall objective of setting up Rohini Commission is to provide recommendations on the further subcategorization among the OBC caste, right? So the OBCs should be further subcategorized. For example, within OBCs there are number of other castes also, right? So there are number of castes within the other backward classes. However, if you take Yadavs for example within OBCs, they are considered as economically progressive, educationally and socially progressive also within OBCs. But on the other hand, within OBCs also there are certain castes who are poor, economically, socially and even educationally more and more backward. So therefore those castes should be given more reservation, because since Yadavs are more progressive, the reservation benefits, the 27% of the reservation benefits are mostly taken by the progressive communities within the OBCs. But what about the caste which are poor within the OBCs, right? So it is also estimated that 97% of the total reserved jobs and even seats in the educational institutions have been garnered by just 25% of the population within the OBCs, okay, at the central level. So this is a very serious issue, and this has to be taken into consideration, and subcategorization within the OBCs is very, very important to ensure that the fruits of reservation would actually reach to the more deserved sections of the society. So what should be the way forward in this context? So there is also a detailed way forward. So there is no doubt that we must plug the loopholes with immediate effect. Okay, so with respect to the misuse of the non-creamy layer, misuse of EWS certificates and even misuse of the disability certificate, we must plug the loopholes, and there should also be a thorough scrutiny to ensure that only eligible applicants, only more deserving candidates would actually get the benefits of reservation, and that is very, very important. And the second thing that we need to consider is a subcategorization of OBCs is very, very important, because that would have the potential to address the underrepresentation or a non-representation of various other communities also. And on this, there is a need for a detailed discussion and debate also. So that should begin on these aspects, so with all stakeholders to implement them, and this would ensure that the benefits of reservation reach the more marginalized among the underprivileged in successive generations. So that should be the overall spirit, and that should be the overall objective of providing reservations. And the next article is with respect to Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Remember that this particular convention is a legally binding convention, and it protects both plants and animals from illegal trade, so that could threaten or endanger these species. However, the news article is that the CITES eases norms for agarwood export. Now we'll understand what is this agarwood, and even we will also understand the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Now India has successfully prevented the inclusion of this agarwood, and its scientific name is Aquilaria melanensis. Okay, so Aquilaria melanensis, so that is the scientific name of this agarwood, right? So India has successfully prevented the inclusion of agarwood in the review of significant trade of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. It is also known as CITES, right? So if it is included in the significant trade, right, so review of the significant trade, then the trade with the agarwood products, for example agarwood oil, so it would be completely restricted, right? That would impact the livelihoods of the farmers who were practicing the commercial agarwood farming or growing the agarwood plants in the northeastern part of India. So therefore CITES also notified a new export quota. So there will be a certain quota of export of the products which were made from the agarwood, and these products are considered highly valuable in the international market. And apart from that, okay, so apart from that, it would be having even the aromatic aspects, right? So resinous wood, and even it is also free from the tree, so that is mostly found in the northeastern part of India. So agarwood is cultivated in different parts of India, so especially it is very, very famous in the northeastern part of India. Okay, so it is cultivated in different parts of India, especially the northeastern parts. For example, this development is going to benefit lakhs of farmers in certain districts of Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, and even Tripura. So therefore, it is a very, very important aspect. And in fact, this agarwood is listed in the appendix 2 of the CITES. Okay, so it is listed in the appendix 2 of the CITES, and the appendix 2 is a category of species that are not necessarily threatened, but whose trade must be controlled, right? So trade must be controlled. So for the first time in 1995, based on India's proposal at COP in 1994. Okay, so the harvest of plants should be allowed from home, community gardens, and even the plantations which are leased with the patta lands, private community plantations, or any other types of small scale or large scale plantations. So that is a very, very important aspect with respect to this. So when we talk about the harvesting of this agarwood, or even the collection of seeds or seedlings, or even saplings and other propagalis, they should not be allowed from the existing wild population. So they are not allowed to collect from the wild population, rather they are actually allowed to collect from the commercial farming. So otherwise from wild, so these things should not be collected, because essentially whenever any plant is included in the sites, to protect that particular plant from the illegal trade, right? So it would prevent illegal international trade. So that illegal trade would lead to the extinction of the species, right? So in recent times there is a rampant illegal international trade in different plant and animal products. So over a period of time, that even threatening the overall existence of such species, right? So that is the overall objective of including any species in the CITES list, right? So whenever any species, either plant or animal species, is included in the CITES, the export would be either restricted or it would be completely banned. The trade in those particular species and the products which are derived from the species would be completely banned or restricted. But in northeastern India, the agarwood is practiced at the commercial scale by different farmers. So in case if it is included in the trade review of sites, then its export would be prevented, or it would be restricted, or even completely banned. And in that case, the commercial agarwood farming practiced by the farmers in the northeastern India would get significantly impacted. It would impact their livelihoods. Okay, so therefore it also caused increase in the cost of agarwood chips and oil in the global markets, because as of now India is a major agarwood trading nations. It is one of the major agarwood or agarwood made products export country, so which is importing, a lot of countries actually dependent on India's agarwood because of number of benefits which are being associated with the agarwood. Now what is CITES? So that is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. So CITES was conceptualized in 1963 at a meeting of International Union for the Conservation of Nature, right? So we can say that it was formed in 1963 at a meeting of IUCN. And it came into force, the CITES, a legally binding treaty, it came into force in the year 1975, and CITES consists of around 183 member countries as of now. So till date, CITES consist of 183 member countries. and they are also abide by the CITES regulation by implementing their domestic or national legislations within their borders to enforce the regulations that were mandated in the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. Now, when we talk about the location of CITES, so it is located in Geneva, Switzerland, and in fact, CITES is administered by the United Nations under the United Nations Environment Program Wing. Okay, so as of now, roughly 5,600 species of animals and 30,000 species of plants are protected by the CITES against overexploitation through international trade. So essentially, it would prevent the international trade of species, because rampant international trade would threaten the existence of species over a period of time. So based on the threat perception of different species, both plants and animals, within the CITES, so there are 3 appendix that were created: Appendix 1, Appendix 2 and Appendix 3. Okay, so you can go through these appendixes. You can just pause the video and you can go through the description of these 3 different appendixes and a different sort of regulation restrictions on the export of the items which are included in the 3 different appendix. So next important article is with respect to ethanol, right? So ethanol used in petrol now more from maize and even damaged food grains, right? So ethanol is a sustainable fuel and that can be produced from the food grains. Ethanol is a sustainable fuel that can be used in the combustible engines, and in fact it is also a sustainable fuel, and because that would come with a very less emissions. However, the problem with the ethanol is that ethanol has to be produced from the food, or it has to be produced from the food grains, and that is the major problem. However, if we rapidly scale up ethanol production in India, so we would reduce our import dependence on fossil fuels. Import dependence on fossil fuels can be substantially reduced. As of now, if we talk about some data over the import of these fossil fuels, 85% of the fossil fuels are imported, right? So when we use ethanol in our vehicles instead of the fossil fuels, either petrol or diesel, that would substantially reduces India's import dependence, saving billions of dollars. So sugar mills and distilleries actually supplied 401 crore liters of ethanol to oil marketing companies till June 30. So of that, 211 crore liters, or we can say that 52.7% of the 401 crore liters was the ethanol that was produced using maize and even the damaged food grains. Now earlier the concern is that ethanol is produced from the food grains and that would lead to the food security issues. But now the thing is that more ethanol is being produced from the damaged food grains, mainly a broken or old rice which is not fit for the human consumption. So therefore, instead of wasting the food which is not food for the human consumption, so we can use it to produce a sustainable fuel like ethanol. And even sugarcane based feedstocks such as molasses or whole juice syrup, so they are actually accounted for remaining 190 liters of ethanol production. However, the government of India has been implementing the ethanol blended petrol program. You just remember this ethanol blended petrol program, right? So ethanol is a sustainable fuel, but the problem is that we are not able to meet the total demand of fossil fuel through ethanol alone. So therefore, what the government has done in recent times is that, for example, if a vehicle engine using 100% of the petrol, and the oil marketing companies should actually include ethanol, should add ethanol into petrol. So therefore now whatever vehicles that you are using, so those vehicles would have 80% of the petrol and 20% of the ethanol, right? So over a period of time, the government actually aimed to increase the ethanol concentration and reduce the petrol or fossil fuel concentration, and that would make these vehicles would emit less greenhouse gases and lesser pollution, and it would also substantially reduces India's dependence on the fossil fuels also. So essentially the ethanol blended petrol program, so that is being implemented throughout the country. As part of this EBP program, oil marketing companies sell petrol which is blended with the ethanol, right? So there is a certain quantity of petrol and also a certain quantity of ethanol as well. So under the ethanol blended petrol program, government has actually fixed the target of 20% blending of ethanol with petrol by 2025. Within 2025, the petrol should be blended with the 20% of the ethanol. Okay, so gradually we would scale up this ethanol concentration in the petrol. So to achieve the target of 20% of the blending by 2025, about 1016 crore liters of ethanol is actually required, and total requirement of ethanol including for other uses is 1350 crore liters. However, about 1700 crore liters of ethanol producing capacity is required to be in place by 2025, considering the plant operates the 80% of the total efficiency. However, the government has actually estimated that the demand would actually increase, demand of the ethanol so would further increase. So therefore that would require 20% of the blending by 2025. Right, so particularly keeping in view there has been a rapid increase in or a growth of petrol based vehicles in two-wheeler and even passenger vehicle segments. So in this context we need to gradually and rapidly scale up the ethanol blending in the vehicles. However, in order to enhance the ethanol production, so it is very important that we need to enhance the ethanol production capacity. Right, so that particular ethanol can be produced from units which convert the food grains which are not used for the human consumption will be converted into the ethanol. So in order to achieve this blending target which are set under the ethanol blending program, the government has notified various ethanol interest subvention schemes from July 2018 to April 2022. So under these ethanol interest subvention schemes, what the government will do? So government will actually facilitate the entrepreneurs to set up new distilleries, for example, molasses based distilleries and grain based distilleries or dual feed based distilleries, and even expansion of existing distilleries such as molasses based, grain based and feed based distilleries throughout the country. So therefore that would substantially enhances the total ethanol production in the country. Right, so oil industry experts have allayed fears over mixing of ethanol with petrol and say it cannot damage engines. So there is no guarantee that it would not damages the engines. Right, so when we talk about ethanol is a biofuel, so that is being obtained primarily from the sugarcane or any other food grains. So blending of ethanol with petrol would reduce dependence on the fossil fuels, and it would also help the environment because it is an environment friendly fuel. So you can also go through the other initiatives to promote ethanol blending by the government, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.